It's Monday. That means it must be time for the Religious Studies Project. I'm David Robertson. He's
David McConaughey. And
she's
Brianne Fallon.
I'm mixing things up, guys. This is how it's always been. You should see when Chris and I do it, it's absolute chaos.
I know, it's that experience really weighing through, right?
Keeping us on outros.
It's that experience. Is once you've done it 100 times, you start wanting to subvert the format. One format we're not going to be subverting this week, however, is that we have an interview this week.
Yes, we do. It's the inestimable Sidney Castillo again doing brilliant work. This is still coming from his time at the EASR, which was in June at Tartu. And this time he's speaking with Gabor Klaniczay about doctors and stigmatics in the 19th and 20th centuries. Take it away.
So here we are again at the Religious Studies Project podcast. It's the fifth and last day of the EASR Conference 2019 in Tartu, Estonia. And now I am here with Gabor Klaniczay from Central European University. Gabor, it's very nice to have you here.
Yes, I'm pleased to be here too. Thank you for interviewing.
Thank you for joining us. And if you could be so kind to introduce yourself, please.
Okay, so I'm a university professor at the Central European University at the Department of Medieval Studies. I'm dealing mostly with medieval religious history, late medieval Christianity. That's my field of expertise. Within that, the problem of the cult of saints, popular religion, witchcraft beliefs, and also another aspect of my research is a little bit to situate Central European religious culture in the whole European or even more broader context.
Excellent. Now, your talk in the conference of the EASR has been about miraculous event stigmata in the 19th, 20th century. Could you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yes. Well, that shows that I'm not only dealing with medieval things. Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm very much in favor of historians dealing also with the results of neighboring disciplines. And there is an interdisciplinary research where I'm actually dealing with history, but also anthropology, religious studies, psychology. A lot of these things are necessary for understanding phenomena like miracles or stigmata, something, the relationship to the supernatural. There is also one other type of interdisciplinarity which is not very much practiced, is that medievalists should know the results of modernists and vice versa. So on the one hand, one says that history is, of course, a long train of traditions and one should know about this, but everybody is specialized in one's own age and says, oh, that's modern, that's no more my field of expertise. And I think this is wrong, especially if one deals with phenomena which are basically very similar. So an individual's relationship to miracle and to the supernatural experience, that has something very common, and it's not by chance that modern people are reaching back to the prophets or the Bible or ancient church fathers. And so one cannot, of course, put an equality sign to the experiences. One has to know its historical context, and one should not be anachronistic. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, religious history has to deal with longue durée. So this is how I started to deal with medieval miracle belief, and within that a special type of miracle, the stigmata. The stigmata, which is a bodily miracle, that the most famous initial miracle, not the first one, but actually the start of the cult of stigmata was with Saint Francis of Assisi, 13th century saint, a major medieval saint, founder of the Franciscan order, who had a vision in 1227 and got stigmatized at at least this is what we got to know after his death, 1227. Actually, that it happened 26. It happened before his death, 2 years before his death, as his legend writer Thomas of Celano says during a vision where a seraph and crucified man appeared to him in the air when he was in Hermitage, and out of this experience, the result was that the wounds of stigmata, Christ's wounds appeared on his body, and this was discovered after his death. Now this is stigmata, and though many Franciscans retain that this is the only unique example that somebody, a human being, becomes like Christ. Saint Francis was venerated like another Christ, an alter Christus in it. The stigmata were actually signs of his being so important and working so much for the redemption of humanity as Christ, or almost so much in the Middle Ages. Now, other saintly persons or other religious persons, men and women, mostly women, by the way, were also claiming to have stigmata, like Saint Francis. And this was a very long-term history, which started in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, there was another very famous stigmatic woman, Catherine of Siena, who belonged to the Dominican order. And her stigmata appeared also during a vision, but did not appear visibly on her body, but because she wanted them to be invisible, not to pretend that she had that high honor. She wanted only the pain, but she wanted the experience. And then there were up to the present stigmatics. And my paper here was about 19th and 20th century stigmatics. And the topic that I was dealing with was actually how medical experts, physicians related to this miracle. Because this miracle was very special in the sense that the stigmatics have these wounds in their bodies, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. And these wounds bleed periodically. These wounds do not get infected. So this is a very special type of bodily miracle. And religious people, mostly Catholics, because this is a Catholic type miracle, are taking it as a very important proof for the existence of God. That such a God can work such wonders in the human body and on earth, which cannot be explained rationally by scientific or medical or other thought. And of course, doctors were challenged and wanted to examine, and there was a lot of criticism and disbelief. And there were very interesting cases, debates, and I was presenting some of these cases.
It's very interesting. And I think you gave a very broad conceptualization of how stigmata happens since the Middle Ages towards modernity. I just thinking about what Michel Sartot said about how mystical phenomena corresponds to also social context of what is happening in those centuries, and particularly 16th, 17th century were very prominent for many, many mystics. I don't know about stigmata, but
there were also stigmata, but some of these mystics have stigmata.
Right.
Yeah.
And how can we understand the social context of 19th, 20th century to explain the stigmata?
One very important social context is that 19th and 20th century are centuries of secularization. Also, after the French Revolution, Napoleon, for example, dissolved many religious orders. And there was, against the Enlightenment and against the rational thinking, which wanted to make the disenchantment of the world, as Max Weber said, happen? Well, there was a re-enchantment. 19th century, there was a Catholic revival with Chateaubriand and the genius of Christianity, and then many other movements. And the church and certain popes were very strongly fighting against the separation of church and state. Mm-hmm. And also there were certain social classes which were in support for that. In France, there was a royalist movement, but also the church's positions in Italy, for example, which was a place where many of these prophets and stigmatics came. Italy was living at that moment the unification of Risorgimento, and at the same time, lot of resistances of local vested interests of churches, and lot of contrast also between Rome and Vatican and the southern region or northern region. So each time there was a conflict situation, and in some conflict situations the church had its own policies. Mm-hmm. And one of the policies was indeed to bring proofs for the existence of God with very spectacular miracles. Mm-hmm. The most spectacular miracles were visions, mm-hmm. Like La Salette in 19th century, or Lourdes. Right. The appearance of the Virgin Mary and Marian miracles. But there were other miracles also related to the Sacred Heart, the Sacré-Cœur. There were also, there were, besides these visionaries, there were these living saints, mm-hmm. the Stigmatics, who had new revelations. Mm-hmm. So, one of the Stigmatics, for example, that I was speaking about, was living in northern Germany. Mm-hmm. Now, northern Germany was a place where already big contrasts were there between Protestants and Catholics. Mm-hmm. Catholics were in minority in northern Germany, in Westphalia, mm-hmm. where but they were there. And now secularization brought another thing in. So there was an Augustinian nun called Anna Katharina Emmerich, mm-hmm. who had these bleeding wounds, these stigmata, and also the crown of thorns. At least she had a vision where Jesus was placing the crown of thorns on her head, and they were regularly bleeding, the place of the crown of thorns. And then later bleeding wounds appeared also on her hands, and also a cross on the chest. And then a debate started. And this was an interesting case because it belonged to Prussia. Mm-hmm. So Prussia was a secularized and Protestant monarchy with a lot of important scientists, among them medical scientists. So they formed a commission to examine these things. Some were saying, "Oh, this was just self-inflicted wounds." Right. Others said that there are the spiritual advisors were using her as a kind of medium, mm-hmm. were telling her that her headache was actually from the crown of thorns, and were influencing her. And indeed, there was a 19th century, this mediumism related to Mesmer and the Mesmerian and the magnetism. Mm-hmm. Now, all kinds of explanations came up. But at the same time, there was also a very famous romantic poet, Clemens Brentano, mm-hmm. listening to her and writing down her visions as new revelations. And these visionaries were telling alternative history, what happened to Jesus and the Bible, or details. And the collected works of Clemens Brentano are the visions of Anna Katharina Emmerich. He didn't even, couldn't even publish the whole thing during his life. He died and his brother continued to publish it. So this is the social context, that the role of religion in 19th century. And of course we can go on. Let me just switch to the end of the 19th century, to the 1870s. It was the moment of the French Commune. It was the French and the German-French war, the defeat of France, and in France and in Belgium. There were a lot of prophets. First prophesying the death of Napoleon III. He did indeed die. Well, such prophecies are not very difficult to say that somebody will die at some point. But also they wanted to bring back, after the Commune, monarchy to France. There was a candidate, Chambord. And so these were actually the questions. And there was a stigmatic called Louis Lateau in France, and also another stigmatic, Palma Mattarelli, in Italy. And these stigmatics were also related to an ecclesiastic, a kind of there was an informal network within the church, which still exists today, that there is the official church, and then there is a grassroots level contact among the charismatics who are cultivating supernatural phenomena. Today it is Medjugorje and all these things. In the 19th century, these stigmatics were there, and there were some doctors. There was a doctor that I was talking about. He was from Clermont-Ferrand. He was a royalist. He was a doctor, a professional, called Antoine Embert-Gourbet, but he went to the stigmatics to explain that these phenomena are indeed unexplainable. And he, as a doctor, says, I know about everything about dermatology, everything about all kinds of illnesses you're speaking about as rational explanation, but it is wrong. These explanations are unfounded. And actually, he was publishing books just to support the stigmatics. So that's the interesting thing, that besides the doctors who wanted to have doubts in the stigmatics, there was a group of believer doctors who wanted to defend the stigmatics with the argument that these phenomena are actually beyond our capacities of explanation. This is why it is coming from God. Exactly. And it is true that many phenomena are impossible to explain. So today's TV shows, X-Files, for example, that's today's supernatural beliefs are related to UFOs or all other things. But the riddles of nature are indeed a good point where belief in the supernatural starts. And stigmata is a long tradition, and this is also a riddle. So in many cases, in the first place, what I want to say is that these persons are truly religious persons, and persons who really concentrate on the suffering of Christ. And want to understand with great compassion the suffering of Christ, and even acting out so most of the stigmata appear on Holy Week, when Christ is so before Easter, and on Holy Friday mostly. And many of these stigmatics are acting out on Holy Fridays, the crucifixion. So they're just like a mystery play. And their wounds start to bleed on Fridays. That's a very particular thing, that just in memory of Christ. And at the same time, they think that they are suffering the same way as Christ for redeeming humanity from its sins. So helping humanity. So it is a kind of psychological disposition, which is also becoming a bodily disposition. So many things are psychosomatic, certainly. And in some cases, it's clear that there is fraud in it. That but in other cases, it is difficult to say. And these persons are also having very sincere mystical texts and dimensions. So it's a very complicated thing. You mentioned Michel de Certeau, for example.
I was about to ask you about that. Yeah, the possession of Rodin.
Yeah. Well, there is a stigmata. Well, not stigmata, but actually, Sir Jeanne des Anges also had some wounds, which were actually stigmata from the devil. But she was showing it in the royal court, and it was there. So she had also a very complicated personality. So Michel de Certeau could analyze that this is a very strange and very complex psychological phenomenon when one lives a religious experience to that point.
He was saying, Jean-Joseph Soran was saying that these eyes have seen, these hands have touched the stigmata. So kind of providing a factual experience towards what is stigmata.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I wanted to ask as well is like you mentioned this in your presentation that there was Catholic doctors that were giving a confirmation that it was in fact miraculous event and therefore it cannot be explained.
Yeah.
But you were also mentioning that they had Protestant doctors.
Yeah.
That were more incisive towards disaccrediting this phenomenon.
Yeah.
So will you elaborate more on that divide in between the same medical discourse, how this was different?
Yeah. Well, basically, yes, as you said, it's not by chance that Protestant doctors, so one Protestant doctor was, for example, one of the critic of this 19th century stigmatic Louis Lateau. Louis Lateau, who lived in the second half of the 19th century in a small Belgian village and got the stigmata at the age of 18, and a big medical debate started, and where the Catholic doctors were describing her stigmata, and then a very famous authority, Rudolf Virchow, from Germany, from Berlin, a Protestant doctor, was writing a long study, über Wunder, on the miracle. And the Protestants were they did not deny miracle absolutely, but they denied this type of massive production of miracles that the Catholics have been relating to the saints and to the stigmatics. So they were for a rational. They were more for a rational explanation of these phenomena, saying that if one does not have the explanation yet, one should not immediately say it is a miracle, but one can sort of explore it further. So there was a Protestant discourse which was more rationalistic. But that does not mean that they were refusing miracle on the whole. So they were reaching back to Saint Augustine, Saint Augustine, who also said that actually these small miracles are just to convince the disbelievers, but there are only two big miracles: is the creation of the world and the resurrection of Christ, and these are actually the big miracles, and the rest is just it can be explained rationally just as well. Also, the Protestants, so the 19th century polemics on miracles were a good field for continuing this debate. But actually, the debate started already in Luther's time, and the Protestantism refused a lot of the things in Catholic beliefs, among them the cult of the saints and the cult of the relics, as something which is they labeled superstition. And there was a long set of debate related to that. So one good authority who examined this in England, for example, was Keith Thomas, Religion and the Decline of Magic, a big monograph where he pointed out how Protestantism was kind of refusing what they considered to be the magic of the medieval church and wanted to bring in more rational arguments.
Excellent. Well, we are almost out of time.
Yeah.
But if you could give us some concluding remarks about your presentation, I think would be a good way to wrap it up.
Yeah. So I told many things already which were in my presentation. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, that I ended with the famous 20th century stigmatic Padre Pio. Padre Pio, who was a Capuchin friar in South Italy, who was stigmatized in 1918. That was also a typical historical moment, a moment of the First World War, with a lot of horrible experiences European people and Italians also went through. And the stigmata was also interestingly related to South Italian situation and history. There were strong clashes between a triumphant socialist movement and the Catholic Church. Padre Pio himself was also an interesting individual. He was an ailing person with a lot of illnesses. That's why he was exempted. He was ruled in as a soldier, but exempted from military service then because of his illnesses. And he became a friar in a very remote Capuchin convent in San Giovanni Rotondo, but a place where a lot of miracles happened because it was just behind the Monte Gargano, where the famous miracles of Saint Michael, the Archangel, came. So it was Italy in general was very favorable to miracles, and it was not only all the places where miracles used to happen made it kind of common knowledge that miracles do happen, and this is how the stigmata came out from Padre Pio. And the story itself is a very interesting story because from the point of view of medical debates, his stigmata were very debated. They were debated because a pharmacist denounced him that he had some iodine tinctures to disinfect his wounds, but some doctors accused him that this was actually to perpetuate the wounds which could have happened out of an illness or other reasons. But because for stigmata, it's very important that the stigmata should happen by divine intervention and not by self-infliction. That can also have devotional background, but it is not a miracle. Right. So stigmata should be miraculous. And then the debate started, and there was a long Inquisition examination of Padre Pio with all the witnesses and everything, and there was a very important Catholic person, a Franciscan friar, Agostino Gemelli, who later was the founder of the Milan University of the Catholic University, and he was very he had many doubts. He was also not only a Franciscan friar, but also a psychiatrist and a doctor. And he thought that Padre Pio was doing a fraud. But other supporters of Padre Pio were defending him. Right. And there was a long debate. He was sentenced to isolation for 10 years, and also that he should not have, because he was also a consecrated priest, Padre Pio, that he should not confess and give public sermons. He gave the public sermons with stigmatic hands, like Christ. So that was very impressive, but some others said that this is just a fraud. But then in the 1930s, he was pardoned, and then his cult was starting in his life, and actually he lived with those stigmata for 50 years, and he had some very popular actions. He built a huge hospital, hospital in San Giovanni Rotondo in a very, very background region where he was really bringing a lot of good things to his surroundings. And then he was later on very much venerated by some popes, like Pope Giovanni John Paul II, the Polish Pope, who was doing pilgrimage to him already from Poland, from the 1940s. And when he became Pope, he was one of his aim was to canonize Padre Pio, which he did actually.
Oh, wow.
So he started the veneration of Padre Pio, and now Padre Pio is the most popular saint. He's a kind of saint of the people, and the notion was also that the people wanted him to become saint, and the church, the high priests, resisted for a while, but then they gave in, and now they canonized him.
Right. Now it's part of the institutionality.
Yeah, but there are some others still have doubts. Mm-hmm. So, in any case, that he's one of the most remarkable saints of the 20th century, mm-hmm. and all his life course is related to 20th century Italian history, right. And there are very good books on him. There is one good Italian historian, Sergio Luzzatto, who wrote a wonderful monograph on him, where he is portraying Padre Pio really as somebody who represents 20th century Italian history with all its contradictions.
Very, very interesting. I think it's like, all the mystical phenomena are related to society in one way or the other.
Certainly, yes.
I think that's a very good takeaway for our interview. We thank you once again, Professor Klaniczay, for being here at the Relief Studies Project, and we hope you have you again soon.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for that interview, Sidney and Gabor. Just to say that we've had confirmation from the EASR that they will be supporting one of our interviewers in going to the IAHR in New Zealand next year.
Hey, so that's amazing.
That's wonderful. That's great.
That is going to be quite a thing. So do get in touch if you would like to volunteer. If you have to now compete with Sidney's, I think, 6 interviews. So,
at least.
Yeah.
At least, yes.
And I think I personally demand that we get an on-site Hobbiton interview. Like, this just has to happen. So, it, in America, at least, is the week of Dread, the week of Black Friday, where we give thanks for all the great things that we have and the plenty that America has in our cultural holiday. But the next day we go and spend a ton of money. And one of the things that our listeners can really do to support the Religious Studies Project and really make sure that we have the funds to help people get audio equipment and to send them to really exciting conferences, to share live interviews with you is what, Brianne? What can they do? So we have a very special I suppose you'd call it an affiliate link through Amazon this week. And David, what does that do for our listeners?
Well, basically, it's if you use that link and then go to Amazon and do your shopping there, then they give us 5% of what you spend. No extra money comes out of your wallet, but it comes out of Amazon's profits to support the Religious Studies Project. It's not just for Black Friday. It's anytime you like. You can drag the link out of the website, and we'll be making it quite clear. It should be in the show notes for this episode, and we'll be sharing it on social media. drag that out into your browser menu there and use that every time, and it really does contribute quite a bit of money to the project, which helps us pay people for doing work for us.
And that's not just books. It's not just clothes or toys. It's Amazon grocery. It's
your peanut butter, guys.
Everything. all your supplies. You could build a whole house and have 5% of it come to the Religious Studies Project,
yep,
which we would appreciate.
Yep. It is important to say, click on the link from your country, because sometimes it gets a little bit skewy. So make sure if you're in the UK, you click on the UK one, or if you're in America, click on the American one.
Yep, so it's .co.uk, .com, or .ca if you're in Canada. And Brianne, we should look into getting an Australian one.
Yeah, because my peanut butter is currently not helping, and we need to fix that.
That's
yeah,
right.
I think we could raise a substantial fee just off your peanut butter money every year. So let's get that sorted.
There's one more way that listeners could support us if they were feeling considerably generous in a monthly form. And that's to support us on Patreon, where we are patreon.com/projectrs. David, can you tell us a little bit more about how Patreon works?
So Patreon has several levels where you can make, you can either make a one-off payment if you want to support the project, but you can also sign up for $1 a month, $5 a month. And for that money, you get access to exclusive extra episodes, including our discourse episodes, which we record every 3 weeks, and which is our news and current affairs show. And also Are You My Data, which is a different format of interviews with some leading scholars at the moment, finding out a little bit more about how they teach, how they write, their backstories, and sometimes some quite controversial questions to them too. So if you're interested in that, sign up. Some of the higher tiers have things like our exclusive enamel badges and notebooks. And the biggest reward of all, though, however, is knowing that you're supporting keeping all of these interviews and the interviews to come free for people around the world who want to find out more about religion from a critical point of view. And that's the biggest reward of all.
Absolutely. Next time we have an interview that I did, Bree, do you want to tell us about what I did?
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's kind of odd to introduce yourself. So we have an interview coming up with our very own David McConaughey, and he interviewed Brad Onishi on the concept of the straight white American Jesus and his podcast on that. I'm very much looking forward to that. But apart from that, all there is left to say is
thanks for listening.
The Religious Studies Project is sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions. The Religious Studies Project is produced by the Religious Studies Project Association, SCIO, a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, charity number SC047750.
Brought to you by editors Brianne Fallon and David McConaughey, and founding editors Chris Cotter, that's me, and David Robertson, that's him. Our features are edited by Rebecca Barrett-Fox, with marketing managed by Benjamin Marcus. Our Opportunities Digest managed by Ella Buck, podcast transcription by Helen Bradstock, and social media managed by Ray Radford.
Don't forget, you can support the project by using our Amazon.com, .co.uk and .ca links, or donating at patreon.com/projectrs. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, and other portals. Thanks for listening.